In the castle of Baron Thunder Ten Tronch in Westphalia there lived a youth, endowed by nature with the most gentle character. His face was the expression of his soul. His judgment was quite honest, and he was extremely simple-minded, and this was the reason, I think, that he was named Candide. Old servants in the house suspected that he was the son of the Baron's sister and a decent, honest gentleman of the neighbourhood, whom this young lady would never marry, because he could only prove 71 quarterings, and the rest of his genealogical tree was lost, owing to the injuries of time. The Baron was one of the most powerful lords in Westphalia, for his castle possessed a door and windows. His great hall was even decorated with a piece of tapestry. The dogs in his stable yards formed a pack of hounds when necessary. His grooms were his huntsmen. The village curate was his grand almoner. They all called him my lord, and laughed heartily at his stories. The Baroness weighed about 350 pounds, was therefore greatly respected, and did the honours of the house with a dignity which rendered her still more respectable. Her daughter Cunegonde, aged 17, was rosy-cheeked, fresh, plump, and tempting. The Baron's son appeared in every respect worthy of his father. The tutor Pangloss was the oracle of the house, and little Candide followed his lessons with all the candour of his age and character. Pangloss taught metaphysico, theologo, cosmo-lonigology. He proved admirably that there is no effect without a cause, and that in this best of all possible worlds, my lord the Baron's castle was the best of castles, and his wife the best of all possible baronesses. "'Tis demonstrated," said he, "that things cannot be otherwise, for since everything is made for an end, everything is necessarily for the best end. Observe that noses were made to wear spectacles, and so we have spectacles. Legs were visibly instituted to be breeched, and we have breeches. Stones were formed to be quarried and to build castles, and my lord has a very noble castle. The greatest baron in the province should have the best house, and as pigs were made to be eaten, we eat pork all the year round. Consequently, those who have asserted that all is well talk nonsense. They ought to have said that all is for the best." Candide listened attentively and believed innocently, for he thought Mademoiselle Cunegonde extremely beautiful, although he was never bold enough to tell her so. He decided that after the happiness of being born Baron of Thunder Ten Tronch, the second degree of happiness was to be Mademoiselle Cunegonde, the third to see her every day, and the fourth to listen to Dr. Pangloss, the greatest philosopher of the province and therefore of the whole world. One day when Cunegonde was walking near the castle, in a Litai wood which was called the Park, she observed Dr. Pangloss in the bushes, giving a lesson in experimental physics to her mother's waiting-maid, a very pretty and docile brunette. Mademoiselle Cunegonde had a great inclination for science and watched breathlessly the reiterated experiments she witnessed. She observed clearly the doctor's sufficient reason, the effects and the causes, and returned home very much excited, pensive, filled with the desire of learning, reflecting that she might be the sufficient reason of young Candide, and that he might be hers. On her way back to the castle, she met Candide and blushed. Candide also blushed. She bade him good morning in a hesitating voice. Candide replied without knowing what he was saying. Next day, when they left the table after dinner, Cunegonde and Candide found themselves behind a screen. Cunegonde dropped her handkerchief. Candide picked it up. She innocently held his hand. The young man innocently kissed the young lady's hand with remarkable vivacity, tenderness, and grace. Their lips met, their eyes sparkled, their knees trembled, their hands wandered. Baron Thunder Ten Tronch passed near the screen, and observing this cause and effect, expelled Candide from the castle by kicking him in the backside frequently and hard. Cunegonde swooned. When she recovered her senses, the Baroness slapped her in the face, and all was in consternation in the noblest and most agreeable of all possible castles. Sooth, what happened to Candide among the Bulgarians? Candide, expelled from the earthly paradise, wandered for a long time without knowing where he was going, turning up his eyes to heaven, gazing back frequently at the noblest of castles which held the most beautiful of young baronesses. He lay down to sleep supperless between two furrows in the open fields. It snowed heavily in large flakes. The next morning, the shivering Candide, penniless, dying of cold and exhaustion, dragged himself towards the neighbouring town, which was called Waldberghof Trab Dickdorf. He halted sadly at the door of an inn. Two men dressed in blue noticed him. "Comrade," said one, "there's a well-built young man of the right height." They went up to Candide and very civilly invited him to dinner. "Gentlemen," said Candide with charming modesty, "you do me a great honour, but I have no money to pay my share." "Ah, sir," said one of the men in blue, "persons of your figure and merit never pay anything. Are you not 5 feet 5 tall?" "Yes, gentlemen," said he, bowing, "that is my height." "Ah, sir, come to table. We will not only pay your expenses, we will never allow a man like you to be short of money. Men were only made to help each other." "You are in the right," said Candide. "That is what Dr. Pangloss was always telling me, and I see that everything is for the best." They begged him to accept a few crowns. He took them and wished to give them an IOU. They refused to take it, and all sat down to table. "Do you not love tenderly?" "Oh, yes," said he, "I love Mademoiselle Cunegonde tenderly." "No," said one of the gentlemen, "we were asking if you do not tenderly love the king of the Bulgarians." "Not a bit," said he, "for I have never seen him." "What? He is the most charming of kings, and you must drink health." "Oh, gladly, gentlemen," and he drank. That if scient, he was told. "You are now the support, the aid, the fender, the hero of the Bulgarians. Your fortune is made, your glory assured." They immediately put irons on his and took him to a regiment. He was made to turn to the right and left, to raise the ramrod and return the ramrod, to take aim to fire, to march double time, and he was given 30 stroke with a stick. The next day he drilled not quite so badly, and received only 20 strokes. The day after he only had 10, and was looked on as a prodigy by his comrades. Candide was completely mystified and could not make out how he was a hero. One fine spring day he thought he would take a walk, going straight ahead, in the belief that to use his legs as he pleased was a privilege of the human species as well as of animals. H had not gone 2 leagues when 4 other heroes, each 6 feet tall, fell upon him, bound him and dragged him back to a tell. He was asked by his judges whether he would rather be thrashed 36 times by the whole regiment or receive 12 lead bullets at once in his brain. Although he protested that men's wills are free and that he wanted neither one nor the other, he had to make a choice. By virtue of that gift of God's which is called liberty, he determined to run the gauntlet 36 times, and actually did so twice. There were 2,000 men in the regiment. That made 4,000 strokes, which laid bare the muscles and nerves from his neck to his backside. As they were about to proceed to a third turn, Candide, utterly exhausted, begged as a favour that they would be so kind as smash his head. He obtained this favour. They bound his eyes. Anna he was made to kneel down. At that moment the king of Bulgarians came by and inquired the victim's crime, and as the king was possessed of a vast genius, he perceived from what H learned about Candide that he was a young metaphysician, ignorant in worldly matters, and therefore pardoned him with a clemency which will be praised in all newspapers and all ages. An honest surgeon healed Candide in 3 weeks with the ointments recommended by Dioscorides. He had already regained a little skin and could walk when the king of the Bulgarians went to war with the king of the Abares. How Candide escaped from the Bulgarians and what became of him. Nothing could be smarter, more splendid, more brilliant, better drawn up than the 2 armies. Trumpets, fifes, hautboys, drums, cannons formed a harmony such as has never been heard even in hell. The cannons first of all laid flat about 6,000 men on each side. Then the musketry removed from the best of worlds some 9,000 or 10,000 blackguards who infested its surface. The bayonet also was the sufficient reason for the death of some thousands of men. The whole might amount to 30,000 souls. Candide, who trembled like a philosopher, hid himself as well as he could during this heroic butchery. At last, while the 2 kings each commanded a Te Deum in his camp, Candide decided to go elsewhere to reason about effects and causes. He clambered over heaps of dead and dying men and reached a neighbouring village, which was in ashes. It was an Abare village, which the Bulgarians had burned in accordance with international law. Here, old men dazed with blows watched the dying agonies of their murdered wives, who clutched their children to their bleeding breasts. There, Disemboweled girls who had been made to satisfy the natural appetites of heroes gasped their last sighs. Others, half burned, begged to be put to death. Brains were scattered on the ground among dismembered arms and legs. Candide fled to another village as fast as he could. It belonged to the Bulgarians, and Abarian heroes had treated it in the same way. Candide, stumbling over quivering limbs or across ruins, at last escaped from the theatre of war, carrying a little food in his knapsack, and never forgetting Mademoiselle Cunegonde. His provisions were all gone when he reached Holland, but having heard that everyone in that country was rich and a Christian, he had no doubt at all, but that he would be as well treated as he had been in the Baron's castle before he had been expelled on account of Mademoiselle Cunegonde's pretty eyes. He asked alms of several grave persons, who all replied that if he continued in that way, he would be shut up in a house of correction to teach him how to live. He then addressed himself to a man who had been discoursing on charity in a large assembly for an hour on end. This orator, glancing at him askance, said, "What are you doing here? Are you for the good cause?" "There is no effect without a cause," said Candide modestly. "Everything is necessarily linked up and arranged for the best. It was necessary that I should be expelled from the company of Mademoiselle Cunegonde, that I ran the gauntlet, and that I beg my bread until I can earn it. All this could not have happened differently." "My friend," said the orator, "do you believe that the Pope is Antichrist?" "They'd never heard so before," said Candide, "but whether he is or isn't, I am starving." "You don't deserve to rat," said the other. "Hence, rascal, hence, you wretch, and never come near me again." The orator's wife thrust her head out of the window, and seeing a man who did not believe that the Pope was Antichrist, she poured on his head a full, "Oh, heavens!" To what excess religious zeal is carried by ladies. A man who had not been baptized, an honest Anabaptist named Jacques, saw the cruel and ignominious treatment of one of his brothers, a featherless two-legged creature with a soul. He took him home, cleaned him up, gave him bread and beer, presented him with 2 florins, and even offered to teach him to work at the manufacture of Persian stuffs, which are made in Holland. Candide threw himself at the man's feet, exclaiming, "Dr. Pangloss was right in telling me that all is for the best in this world, for I am vastly more touched by your extreme generosity than by the harshness of the gentleman in the black cloak and his good lady." The next day, when he walked out, he met a beggar covered with sores, dull-eyed, with the end of his nose fallen away, his mouth awry, his teeth black, who talked huskily, was tormented with a violent cough, and spat out a tooth at every cough. How Candide met his old master in philosophy, Dr. Pangloss, and what happened Candide, moved even more by compassion than by horror, gave this horrible beggar the 2 florins he had received from the honest Anabaptist Jacques. The phantom gazed fixedly at him, shed tears, and threw its arms round his neck. Candide recoiled in terror. "Alas!" said the wretch to the other wretch, "don't you recognize your dear Pangloss?" "What do I hear? You, my dear master, you in this horrible state? What misfortune has happened to you? Why are you no longer in the noblest of castles? What has become of Mademoiselle young ladies, the masterpiece of nature?" "T am exhausted," said Pangloss. Candide immediately took him to the Anabaptist stable, where he gave him a little bread to eat, and when Pangloss had recovered, "Well," said he, "Cunegonde?" "Dead," replied the other. At this word Candide swooned. His friend restored him to his senses with a little bad vinegar which happened to be in the stable. Candide opened his eyes. "Cunegonde dead! Ah, best of worlds, where are you? But what illness did she die of? Was it because she saw me kicked out of her father's noble castle?" "No," said Pangloss. "She was disembowelled by Bulgarian soldiers, after having been raped to the limit of possibility. They broke the Baron's head when he tried to defend her. The Baroness was cut to pieces. My poor pupil was treated exactly like his sister. And as to the castle, there is not one stone standing on another, not a barn, not a sheep, not a duck, not a tree. But we were well avenged, for the Abares did exactly the same to a neighbouring barony which belonged to a Bulgarian lord." At this, Candide swooned again, but having recovered and having said all that he ought to say, he inquired the cause and effect, the sufficient reason which had reduced Pangloss to so piteous a state. "Alas!" said Pangloss. "'Tis love, love the consoler of the human race, the preserver of the universe, the soul of all tender creatures, gentle love." "Alas," said Candide, "I am acquainted with this love, this sovereign of our hearts, this soul of our soul. It has never brought me anything but 1 kiss and 20 kicks in the backside. How could this beautiful cause produce in you so abominable an effect?" Pangloss replied as follows. "My dear Candide, you remember Paquette, the maidservant of our august Baroness, in her arms. I enjoyed the delights of paradise which have produced the tortures of hell, by which you see I am devoured. She was infected and perhaps is dead. Paquette received this present from a most learned monk, who had it from the source, for he received it from an old countess, who had it from a cavalry captain, who owed it to a marchioness, who derived it from a page, who had received it from a Jesuit, who, when a novice, had it in a direct line from one of the companions of Christopher Columbus. For my part, I shall not give it to anyone, for one am dying." "O Pangloss!" exclaimed Candide, "this is a strange genealogy. Wasn't the devil at the root of it?" "Not at all," replied that great man. "It was something indispensable in this best of worlds, a necessary ingredient. For if Columbus in an island of America had not caught this disease which poisons the source of generation, and often indeed prevents generation, we should not have chocolate and cochineal. It must also be noticed that hitherto in our continent this disease is peculiar to us, like theological disputes. The Turks, the Indians, the Persians, the Chinese, the Siamese, and the Japanese are not yet familiar with it, but there is a sufficient reason why they in their turn should become familiar with it in a few centuries. Meanwhile, it has made marvellous progress among us, and especially in those large armies composed of honest, well-bred stipendiaries who decide the destiny of states. It may be asserted that when 30,000 men fight a pitched battle against an equal number of troops, there are about 20,000 with the pox on either side. "Admirable," said Candide, "but you must get cured." "How can I?" said Pangloss. "I haven't a sou, my friend, and in the whole extent of this globe, you cannot be bled or receive an enema without paying or without someone paying for you." This last speech determined Candide. He went and threw himself at the feet of his charitable Anabaptist, Jack, and drew so touching a picture of the state to which his friend was reduced. The good easy man did not hesitate to succour Pangloss. He had him cured at his own expense. In this cure Pangloss only lost 1 eye and 1 ear. He could write well and knew arithmetic perfectly. The Anabaptist made him his bookkeeper. At the end of 2 months he was compelled to go to Lisbon on business, and took his 2 philosophers on the boat with him. Pangloss explained to him how everything was for the best. Jacques was not of this opinion. "Men," said he, "must have corrupted nature a little, for they were not born wolves, and they have become wolves. God did not give them 24-pounder cannons or bayonets, and they have made bayonets and cannons to destroy each other. I might bring bankruptcies into the account, and justice which seizes the goods of bankrupts in order to deprive the creditors of them." "It was all indispensable," replied the one-eyed doctor, "and private misfortunes make the public good, so that the more private misfortunes there are, the more everything is well." While he was reasoning, the air grew dark. The winds blew from the 4 quarters of the globe, and the ship was attacked by the most horrible tempest in sight of the port of Lisbon. Half the enfeebled passengers, suffering from that inconceivable anguish which the rolling of a ship causes in the nerves and in all the humours of bodies shaken in contrary directions, did not retain strength enough even to trouble about the danger. The other half screamed and prayed. The sails were torn, the masts broken, the vessel leaking. Those worked who could, no one cooperated, no one commanded. The Anabaptist tried to help the crew a little. He was on the main deck. A furious sailor struck him violently and stretched him on the deck, but the blow he delivered gave the sailor so violent a shock that he fell head first out of the ship. He remained hanging and clinging to part of the broken mast. The good Jack ran to his aid, helped him to climb back, and from the effort he made was flung into the sea in full view of the sailor, who allowed him to drown without condescending even to look at him. Candide came up, saw his benefactor reappear for a moment, and then be engulfed for ever. He tried to throw himself after him into the sea. he was prevented by the philosopher Pangloss, who proved to him that the Bay of Lisbon had been expressly created for the Anabaptist to be drowned in it. While he was proving this a priori, the vessel sank, and everyone perished except Pangloss, Candide, and the brutal sailor who had drowned the virtuous Anabaptist. The blackguard swam successfully to the shore, and Pangloss and Candide were carried there on a plank. When they had recovered a little, they walked toward Lisbon. They had a little money, by the help of which they hoped to be saved from hunger after having escaped the storm. Weeping the death of their benefactor, they had scarcely set foot in the town when they felt the earth tremble under their feet. The sea rose in foaming masses in the port and smashed the ships which rode at anchor. Whirlwinds of flame and ashes covered the streets and squares. The houses collapsed. The roofs were thrown upon the foundations, and the foundations were scattered. 30,000 inhabitants of every age and both sexes were crushed under the ruins. Whistling and swearing, the sailor said, "There'll be something to pick up here." "What can be the sufficient reason for this phenomenon?" said Pangloss. "It is the last day," cried Candide. The sailor immediately ran among the debris, dared death to find money, found it, seized it, got drunk, and having slept his wine, purchased the favours of the first woman of good will he met on the ruins of the houses and among the dead and dying. Pangloss, however, pulled him by the sleeve. "My friend," said he, "this is not well. You are disregarding universal reason. You choose the wrong time." "Blood and ounds," he retorted. "I'm a sailor, and I was born in Batavia. 4 times Havel stamped on the crucifix during 4 voyages to Japan. You have found the right man for your universal reason." Candide had been hurt by some falling stones. He lay in the street covered with debris. He said to Pangloss, "Alas, get me a little wine and oil. I am dying." "This earthquake is not a new thing," replied Pangloss. "The town of Lima felt the same shocks in America last year. Similar causes produce similar effects. There must certainly be a train of sulphur underground from Lima to Lisbon." "Nothing is more probable," replied Candide, "but for God's sake a little oil and wine." "What do you mean, probable?" replied the philosopher. "I maintain that it is proved." Candide lost consciousness, and Pangloss brought him a little water from a neighbouring fountain. Next day they found a little food as they wandered among the ruins, and regained a little strength. Afterwards they worked like others to help the inhabitants who had escaped death. Some citizens they had assisted gave them as good a dinner as could be expected in such a disaster. True, was a dreary meal. The hosts watered their bread with their tears, but Pangloss consoled them by assuring them that things could not be otherwise. "For," said he, "all this is for the best, for if there is a volcano at Lisbon, it cannot be anywhere else, for it is impossible that things should not be where they are. All is well." A little dark man, a familiar of the Inquisition, sat beside him, politely took up the conversation and said, "Apparently, you do not believe in original sin, for if everything for the best, there was neither fall nor punishment." "I most humbly beg your Excellency's pardon," replied Pangloss still lightly, "for the fall of man and the curse necessarily ends turned into the best of all possible worlds." "Then you do not believe in free will?" said the familiar. "Your Excellency will pardon me," said Pangloss. "Free will can exist with absolute necessity, for it was necessary that we should be free, for in short, limited will." Pangloss was in the middle of his phrase when the familiar nodded to his armed attendant, who was pouring out port or a Porto wine for him. After the earthquake, which destroyed 3/4 of Lisbony, the wise men of that country could discover no more efficacious way of preventing a total ruin than by giving the people a splendid auto da fe. It was decided by the University of Coimbra that the sight of several persons being slowly burned in great ceremony is an infallible secret for preventing earthquakes. Consequently, they had arrested a Biscayan convicted of having ma-ried his fellow godmother, and 2 Portuguese who, when eating a chicken, had thrown away the fat. After dinner they came and bound Dr. Pangloss and his disciple Candide, or because he had spoken, and the other because he had listened with an air of approbation. They were both carried separately, extremely cool apartments, where there was never any discomfort from the sun. A week afterwards each was dressed in a sananito, and their heads were ornamented with paper mitres. Candide's mitre and San Benito were painted with flames upside down and with devils who had neither tails nor claws, but Pangloss's devils had claws and tails, and his flames were upright. Dressed in this manner, they marched in procession and listened to a most pathetic sermon, followed by lovely plain-song music. Candide was flogged in time to the music, while the singing went on. The Biscayan and the 2 men who had not wanted to eat fat were burned, and Pangloss was hanged, although this is not the custom. The very same day the earth shook again with a terrible clamour. Candide, terrified, dumbfounded, bewildered, covered with blood, quivered from head to foot, said to himself, "If this is the best of all possible worlds, what are the others? Let it pass that I was flogged, for I was flogged by the Bulgarians. But, oh, my dear Pangloss, the greatest of philosophers, must I see you hanged without knowing why? Oh, my dear Anabaptist, the best of men, was it necessary that you should be drowned in port? Oh, Mademoiselle Cunegonde, the pearl of women, was it necessary that your belly should be slit?" He was returning, scarcely able to support himself, preached at, flogged, absolved, and blessed, when an old woman accosted him and said, "Courage, my son, follow me." Candide did not take courage, but he followed the old woman a hovel. She gave him a pot of ointment to rub on, and left Mum food and drink. She pointed out a fairly clean bed. Near the D there was a suit of clothes. "Eat, drink, sleep," she said. "One may Our Lady of Atocha, my Lord St. Anthony of Padua, and my Lord St. James of Compostela take care of you. I shall come back tomorrow." Candide, still amazed by all he had seen, by all he had suffered, and still more by the old woman's charity, tried to kiss her hand. "'Tis not my hand you should kiss," said the old woman. "I shall come back tomorrow. Rub on the ointment, eat and sleep." In spite of all his misfortune, Candide ate and went to sleep. Next day the old woman brought him breakfast, examined his back, and smeared him with an other ointment. Later she brought him dinner, and returned in the evening with supper. The next day she went through the same ceremony. "Who are you?" Candide kept asking her. "5. Who has inspired you with so much kindness? How can I thank you?" The good woman never made any reply. She returned in the evening, but without any supper. "Come with me," said she, "and do not speak a word." She took him by the arm and walked into the country with him for about 1/4 of a mile. They came to an isolated house, surrounded with gardens and canals. The old woman knocked at a little door. It was opened. She led Candide up a back stairway into a gilded apartment, left him on a brocaded sofa, shut the door, and went away. Candide thought he was dreaming, and felt that his whole life was a bad dream and the present moment an agreeable dream. The old woman soon reappeared. She was supporting with difficulty a trembling woman of majestic stature, glittering precious stones, and covered with a veil. "Remove the eye," said the old woman to Candide. The young man added and lifted the veil with a timid hand. What a moment! What a surprise! He thought he saw Mademoiselle Cunegonde. In fact, he was looking at her. It was she herself. His strength failed him. He could not utter a word and fell at her feet. Cunegonde fell on the sofa. The old woman dosed them with distilled waters. They recovered their senses and began to speak. At first they uttered only broken words, questions and answers at cross purposes, sighs, tears, exclamations. The old woman advised them to make less noise and left them alone. "What, is it you?" said Candide. "You are alive, and I find you here in Portugal. Then you were not raped? Your belly was not slit, as the philosopher Pangloss assured me?" "Yes, indeed," said the fair Cunegonde, "but those 2 accidents are not always fatal." "But your father and mother were killed?" "'Tis only too true," said Cunegonde, weeping. "And your brother?" "My brother was killed too. And why are you in Portugal? And how did you know I was here? And by what strange adventure have you brought me to this house?" "I will tell you everything," replied the lady. "But first of all you must tell me everything that has happened to you since the innocent kiss you gave me and the kicks you received." Candide obeyed with profound respect, and although he was bewildered, although his voice was weak and trembling, although his back was still a little painful, he related in the most natural manner all he had endured since the moment of their separation. Cunegonde raised her eyes to heaven. She shed tears at the death of the good Anabaptist and Pangloss, after which she spoke as follows to Candide, who did not miss a word and devoured her with his I was fast asleep in bed when it pleased heaven to send the Bulgarians to our noble castle of Thunder Ten Tronch. They murdered my father and brother and cut my mother to pieces. A large Bulgarian 6 feet tall, seeing that I had swooned at the spectacle, began to rape me. This brought me to. I recovered my senses. I screamed, I struggled, I bit, I scratched. I tried to tear out the big Bulgarian's eyes, not knowing that what was happening in my father's castle was a matter of custom. The brute stabbed me with a knife in the left side, where I still have the scar. Alas, I hope I shall see it, said the naive Candide. You shall see it, said Cunegonde, but let me go on. Go on, said Candide. She took up the thread of her story as follows. A Bulgarian captain came in, saw me covered with blood, and the soldier did not disturb himself. The captain was angry at the brute's lack of respect to him, and killed him on my body. Afterwards, he had me bandaged and took me to his billet as a prisoner of war. I washed the few shirts he had and did the cooking. I must admit he thought me very pretty, and I will not deny that he was very well built, and that his skin was white and soft. Otherwise he had little wit and little philosophy. It was plain that he had not been brought up by Dr. Pangloss. At the end of 3 months he lost all his money and got tired of me. He sold me to a Jew named Don Issachar, who traded in Holland and Portugal and had a passion for women. This Jew devoted himself to my person, but he could not triumph over it. I resisted him better than the Bulgarian soldier. A lady of honour may be raped once, but it strengthens her virtue. In order to subdue me, the Jew brought me to this country house. Up till then I believed that there was nothing on earth so splendid as the castle of Thunder Ten Tronch. I was undeceived. One day the Grand Inquisitor noticed me at Mass. He ogled me continually and sent a message that he wished to speak to me on secret affairs. I was taken to his palace. I informed him of my birth. He pointed out how much it was beneath my rank to belong to an Israelite. A proposition was made on his behalf to Don Issachar to give me up to his lordship. Don Issachar, who is the court banker and a man of influence, would not agree. The Inquisitor threatened him with an auto-da-fe. At last the Jew was frightened and made a bargain, whereby the house and I belong to both in common. The Jew has Mondays, Wednesdays, and the Sabbath day, and the Inquisitor has the other days of the week. This arrangement has lasted for 6 months. It has not been without quarrels, for it has often been debated whether the night between Saturday and Sunday belonged to the old law or the new. For my part, I have hitherto resisted them both, and I think that is the reason why they still love me. At last, my lord the Inquisitor was pleased to arrange an auto-da-fe to remove the scourge of earthquakes and to intimidate Don Issachar. He honoured me with an invitation. I had an excellent seat, and refreshments were served to the ladies between the Mass and the execution. I was indeed horror-stricken when I saw the burning of the 2 Jews and the honest Biscayan who had married his fellow godmother. But what was my surprise, my terror, my anguish, when I saw in a San Benito and under a mitre a face which resembled Pangloss's. I rubbed my eyes, I looked carefully, I saw him hanged, and I fainted. I had scarcely recovered my senses when I saw you stripped naked. That was the height of horror, of consternation, of grief and despair. I will frankly tell you that your skin is even whiter and of a more perfect tint than that of my Bulgarian captain. This spectacle redoubled all the feelings which crushed and devoured me. I exclaimed, I tried to say, "Stop, barbarians!" but my voice failed, and my cries would have been useless. When you had been well flogged, I said to myself, how does it happen that the charming Candide and the wise Pangloss are in Lisbon, the one to receive 100 lashes, and the other to be hanged, by order of my lord the Inquisitor, whose darling I am? Pangloss deceived me cruelly when he said that all is for the best in the world. I was agitated, distracted, sometimes beside myself and sometimes ready to die of faintness, and my head was filled with the massacre of my father, of my mother, of my brother, the insolence of my horrid Bulgarian soldier, the gash he gave me, my slavery, my life as a kitchen wench, my Bulgarian captain, my horrid Don Issachar, my abominable Inquisitor, the hanging of Dr. Pangloss, that long miserere in counterpoint during which you were flogged, and above all the kiss one gave you behind the screen that day, when I saw you for the last time. I praised God for bringing you back to me through so many trials. I ordered my old woman to take care of you and to bring you here as soon as she could. She has carried out my commission very well. I have enjoyed the inexpressible pleasure of seeing you again, of listening to you, and of speaking to you. You must be very hungry. I have a good appetite. Let us begin by having supper." Both sat down to supper, and after supper they returned to the handsome sofa we have already mentioned. They were still there when Signor Don Issachar, one of the masters of the house, arrived. It was the day of the Sabbath. He came to enjoy his rights and to express his tender love. This Issachar was the most choleric Hebrew who had been seen in Israel since the Babylonian captivity. "What?" said he. No word of a Galilean. Isn't it enough to have the Inquisitor? Must these scoundrels share with me too?" So saying, he drew a long which he always carried, and thinking that his adversary, unarmed, threw himself upon Candide, but our good Ra-Phalion had received an excellent sword from the old Y along with his suit of clothes. He drew his sword, and although he had a most gentle character, laid the Israelite stone dead on the floor at the feet of the fair Cunegonde. "Holy Virgin!" she exclaimed, "what will become of us? A man killed in my house? If the police come, we are lost." "If Pangloss had not been hanged," said Candide, "he would have given us good advice in this extremity, for he was a great philosopher. In default of him, let us consult the old woman." She was extremely prudent, and was beginning to give her advice when another little door opened. It was an hour after midnight, and Sunday was begin a-nigh. This day belonged to my lord the Inquisitor. He came in and saw the flogged Candide's sword in hand, a corpse lying on the ground, Cunegonde in terror, and the old woman giving advice. At this moment, here is what happened in Candide's soul, and the manner of his reasoning. If this holy man calls for help, he will infallibly have me burned. He might do as much to Cunegonde. He had me pitilessly lashed. He is my rival. I am in the mood to kill. There is no room for hesitation. His reasoning was clear and swift, and, without giving the Inquisitor time to recover from his surprise, he pierced him through and cast him beside the Jew. "Here's another," said Cunegonde. "There is no chance of mercy. We are excommunicated. Our last hour has come. How does it happen that you, who were born so mild, should kill a Jew and a prelate in 2 minutes?" "My dear young lady," replied Candide, "when a man is in love, and has been flogged by the Inquisition, he is beside himself." The old woman then spoke up and said, "In the stable are the Andalusian horses, with their saddles and bridles. Let the Bray, Candide, prepare them. Mademoiselle has moidores and diamonds. Let us mount quickly, although I can only sit on one butt-tock, and go to Cadiz. The weather is beautifully fine, and it is most pleasant to travel in the coolness of the night." Candide immediately saddled the 3 horses. Cunegonde, the old woman, and he rode 30 miles without stopping. While they were riding away, the holy Hermandad arrived at the house. My lord was buried in a splendid church, and Issachar was thrown into a sewer. Candide, Cunegonde and the old woman had already reached the little town of Avicena in the midst of the mountains of the Sierra Morena, and they talked in their inn as follows. "Who can have stolen my pistoles and my diamonds?" said Cunegonde, weeping. "How shall we live? What shall we do? Where shall we find inquisitors and Jews to give me others?" "Alas," said the old woman, "I strongly suspect a reverend Franciscan father who slept in the same inn at Badajoz with us. Heaven forbid that I should judge rashly. But he twice came into our room and left long before we did." "Alas," said Candide, "the good Pangloss often proved to me that this world or goods are common to all men, and that every one has an equal right to them. According to these principles, the monk Shu have left us enough to continue our journey. Have you nothing left then, my fair Cunegonde?" "Not a maravedi," said she. "What are we to do?" said Candide. "Sell one of the horses," said the old woman. "One will ride postilion behind Mademoiselle Cunegonde, although I can only sit on one buttock, and we will get to Cadiz." In the same hotel there was a Benedictine friar. He bought the horse very cheap. Candide, Cunegonde, and the old woman passed through Lucena, Chillas, Lebrixa, and at last reached Cadiz. A fleet was there being equipped, and troops were being raised to bring to reason the reverend Jesuit fathers of Paraguay, who were accused of causing the revolt of one of their tribes against the kings of Spain and Portugal near the town of Sacramento. Candide, having served with the Bulgarians, went through the Bulgarian drill before the general of the little army with so much grace, celerity, skill, pride, and agility that he was given the command of an infantry company. He was now a captain. He embarked with Mademoiselle Cunegonde, the old woman, 2 servants, and the 2 Andalusian horses which had belonged to the Grand Inquisitor of Portugal. During the voyage, they had many discussions about the philosophy of poor Pangloss. "We are going to a new world," said Candide, "and no doubt it is there that everything is for the best, for it must be admitted that one might lament a little over the physical and moral happenings in our own world." "I love you with all my heart," said Cunegonde, "but my soul is still shocked by what I have seen and undergone." "All will be well," replied Candide. "The sea in this new world already is better than the seas of our Europe. It is calmer, and the winds are more constant. It is certainly the new world which is the best of all possible worlds." "God grant it," said Cunegonde, "but I have been so horribly unhappy in mine that my heart is nearly closed to hope." "You complain," said the old woman to them. "Alas, you have not endured such misfortunes as mine." Cunegonde almost laughed and thought it most amusing of the old woman to assert that she was more unfortunate. "Alas, my dear," said she, "unless you have been raped by 2 Bulgarians, stabbed twice in the belly, have had 2 castles destroyed, 2 fathers and mothers murdered before your eyes, and have seen 2 of your lovers flogged in an auto-da-fe, I do not see how you can surpass me. Moreover, I was born a baroness with 72. You do not know my birth," said the old woman, "and if I showed you my backside, you would not talk as you do, and you would suspend your judgment." This speech aroused intense curiosity in the minds of Cunegonde and Candide, and the old woman spoke as follows. The old woman's story. "My eyes were not always bloodshot and red-rimmed. My nose did not always touch my chin, and I was not always a servant. I am the daughter of Pope Urban X and the Princess of Palestrina. Until I was 14, I was brought up in a palace to which all the castles of your German barons would not have served as stables. And one of my dresses cost more than all the magnificence of Westphalia. I increased in beauty, in grace, in talents, among pleasures, respect, and hopes. Already I inspired love. My breasts were forming. And what breasts! White, firm, carved like those of the Venus de Medici. And what eyes, what eyelids, what black eyebrows! What fire shone from my 2 eyeballs and dimmed the glitter of the stars, as the local poets pointed out to me. The women who dressed and undressed me fell into ecstasy when they beheld me in front and behind, and all the men would have liked to be in their place. I was betrothed to a ruling prince of Massa Carrara. What a prince! As beautiful as I was, formed of gentleness and charms, brilliantly witty and burning with love, I loved him with a first love, idolatrously and extravagantly. The marriage ceremonies were arranged with unheard of pomp and magnificence. There were continual fêtes, revels, and comic operas. All Italy wrote sonnets for me, and not a good one among them. I reached the moment of my happiness when an old marchioness who had been my prince's mistress invited him to take chocolate with her. Less than 2 hours afterwards, he died in horrible convulsions. But that is only a trifle. My mother was in despair, though less distressed than I, and wished to absent herself for a time from a place so disastrous. She had a most beautiful estate near Gaeta. We embarked on a galley, gilded like the altar of St. Peter's at Rome. A Sal pirate swooped down and boarded us. Our soldiers defended us like soldiers of the Pope. They threw down their arms, fell on their knees, and asked the pirates for absolution in articulo mortis. They were immediately stripped as naked as monkeys, and my mother, our ladies of honour, and myself as well. The diligence with which these gentlemen strip people is truly admirable. But I was still more surprised by their inserting a finger in a place belonging to all of us, where women usually only allow the end of a syringe. This appeared to me a very strange ceremony, but that is how we judge everything when we leave our own country. I soon learned that it was to find out if we had hidden any diamonds there. 'Tis a custom established from time immemorial among the civilized nations who roam the seas. I have learned that the religious knights of Malta never fail in it when they capture Turks and Turkish women. This is an international law which has never been broken. I will not tell you how hard it is for a young princess to be taken with her mother as a slave to Morocco. you will also guess all we had to endure in the pirate's ship. My mother was still very beautiful. Our ladies of honour, even our waiting maids, possessed more charms than could be found in all Africa, and I was ravishing, I was beauty, grace itself, and I was a virgin. I did not remain so long. The flower which had been reserved for the handsome prince of Massa Carrara was ravished from me by a pirate captain. He was an abominable Negro who thought he was doing me a great honour. The Princess of Palestrina and I must indeed have been strong to bear up against all we endured before our arrival in Morocco. But let that pass. These things are so common that they are not worth mentioning. Morocco was swimming in blood when we arrived. The 50 sons of the Emperor Moulay Ismail had each a faction, and this produced 50 civil wars, of blacks against blacks, browns against browns, mulattoes against mulattoes. There was continual carnage throughout the whole extent of the empire. Scarcely had we landed when the blacks of a party hostile to that of my pirate arrived with the purpose of depriving him of his booty. After the diamonds and the gold, we were the most valuable possessions. I witnessed a fight such as is never seen in your European climates. The blood of the northern peoples is not sufficiently ardent. Their madness for women does not reach the point which is common in Africa. The Europeans seem to have milk in their veins, but vitriol and fire flow in the veins of the inhabitants of Mount Atlas and the neighbouring countries. They fought with the fury of the lions, tigers, and serpents of the country to determine who should have us. A Moor grasped my mother by the right arm, my captain's lieutenant held her by the left arm, a Moorish soldier held one leg, and one of our pirates seized the other. In a moment, nearly all our women were seized in the same way by 4 soldiers. My captain kept me hidden behind him. He had a scimitar in his hand and killed everybody who opposed his fury. I saw my mother and all our Italian women torn to pieces, gashed, massacred by the monsters who disputed them. The prisoners, my companions, those who had captured them, soldiers, sailors, blacks, browns, whites, mulattoes, and finally my captain were all killed, and I remained expiring on a heap of corpses. As everyone knows, such scenes go on in an area of more than 300 square leagues, and yet no one ever fails to recite the 5 daily prayers ordered by Mahomet. With great difficulty I extricated myself from the bloody heaps of corpses and dragged myself to the foot of a large orange tree on the bank of a stream. There I fell down with terror, weariness, horror, despair, and hunger. Soon afterwards, my exhausted senses fell into a sleep which was more like a swoon than repose. I was in this state of weakness and insensibility between life and death, when I felt myself oppressed by something which moved on my body. I opened my eyes and saw a white man of good appearance who was sighing and muttering between his teeth. "O c'è sciagura d'essere senza coglioni." Continuation of the old woman's misfortunes. Amazed and delighted to hear my native language, and not less surprised at the words spoken by this man, I replied that there were greater misfortunes than that of which he complained. In a few words I informed him of the horrors I had undergone, and then swooned again. He carried me to a neighbouring house, had me put to bed, gave me food, waited on me, consoled me, flattered me, told me he had never seen anyone so beautiful as I, and that he had never so much regretted that which no one could give back to him. I was born at Naples, he said, and every year they make 2,000 or 3,000 children there into capons. Some die of it, others acquire voices more beautiful than women's, and others become the governors of states. This operation was performed upon me with very great success, and I was a musician in the chapel of the Princess of Palestrina. "Of my mother," I exclaimed. "Of your mother," cried he, weeping. "What, are you that young princess I brought up to the age of 6, and who even then gave promise of being as beautiful as you are?" "I am." "My mother is 400 yards from here, cut into quarters under a heap of corpses." I related all that had happened to me. He also told me his adventures and informed me how he had been sent to the King of Morocco by a Christian power to make a treaty with that monarch, whereby he was supplied with powder, cannons, and ships to help to exterminate the commerce of other Christians. "My mission is accomplished," said this honest eunuch. "One am about to embark at Ceuta, and I will take you back to Italy. Ma c'è sciagura d'essere senza coglioni." I thanked him with tears of gratitude, and instead of taking me back to Italy, he conducted me to Algiers and sold me to the Dey. I had scarcely been sold when the plague which had gone through Africa, Asia, and Europe broke out furiously in Algiers. You have seen earthquakes, but have you ever seen the plague? Never, replied the Baroness. If you had, replied the old woman, you would admit that it is much worse than an earthquake. It is very common in Africa. I caught it. Imagine the situation of a pope's daughter aged 15, who 3 months had undergone poverty and slavery, had raped nearly every day, had seen her mother cut into 4 pieces, had undergone hunger and war, and was now dying the plague in Algiers. However, I did not die, but my Eunice and the Dey and almost all the seraglio of Algiers perished. When the first ravages of this frightful plague were over, the Dey's slaves went sold. A merchant bought me and carried me to Tunis. He sold me to another merchant who resold me af Tripoli. From Tripoli I was resold to Alexandria, from Alexandria resold to Smyrna, from Smyrna to Constantinople. I was finally bought by an aga of the Janissaries, who was soon ordered to defend Azov against the Russians who were besieging it. The aga, who was a man of great gallantry, took his whole seraglio with him, and lodged us in a little fort on the islands of Pelusi Mayotis, guarded by 2 black eunuchs and 20 soldiers. He killed a prodigious number of Russians, but they returned the compliment as well. Azov was given up to fire and blood. Neither sex nor age was pardoned. Only our little fort remained, and the enemy tried to reduce it by starving us. The 20 Janissaries had sworn never to surrender us. The extremities of hunger to which they were reduced forced them to eat our 2 eunuchs for fear of breaking their oath. Some days later they resolved to eat the women. We had with us a most pious and compassionate imam who delivered a fine sermon to them by which he persuaded them not to kill us altogether. "Cut," said he, "only 1 buttock from each of these ladies, and you will have an excellent meal. If you have to return, there will still be as much left in a few days. Heaven will be pleased at so charitable action you will be saved." He was very eloquent and persuaded them. This horrible operation was performed upon us. The Imam anointed us with the same balm that is used for children have just been circumcised. We were all at the point of death. Scarcely had the Janissaries finished the meal we had supplied when the Russians arrived in flat-bottomed boats. Not a Janissary escaped. The Russians paid no attention to the state we were in. There are French doctors everywhere. One of them, who was very skillful, took care of us. He healed us, and I shall remember all my life that, when my wounds were cured, he made propositions to me. For the rest, he told us all to cheer up. He told us that the same thing had happened in several sieges, and that it was a law of war. As soon as my companions could walk, they were sent to Moscow. I fell to the lot of a boyar, who made me his gardener and gave me 20 lashes a day. But at the end of 2 years, the lord was broken on the wheel with 30 other boyars owing to some court disturbance, and one profited by this adventure. I fled. I crossed all Russia. For a long time I was servant in an inn at Riga, then at Rostock, at Wismar, at Leipzig, at Kassel, at Utrecht, at Leiden, at The Hague, at Rotterdam. I have grown old in misery and in shame, with only half a backside, always remembering that I was the daughter of a pope. 100 times I wanted to kill myself, but I still loved life. This ridiculous weakness is perhaps the most disastrous of our inclinations. For is there anything sillier than to desire to bear continually a burden one always wishes to throw on the ground, to look upon oneself with horror, and yet to cling to oneself, in short, to caress the serpent which devours us until he has eaten our heart? By the countries it has been my fate to traverse, and in the inn, where I have served, I have seen a prodigious number of Piu who hated their lives. But I have only seen 12 who voluntarily put an end to their misery. 3 Negroes, 4 English men, 4 Genevans, and a German professor named Robeck. I ended up as servant to the Jew, Don Issachar. He placed me in your service, my fair young lady. I attached myself to your fate and have been more occupied with your adventures than with my own. I should never even have spoken of my misfortunes if you had not piqued me a little, and if it had not been the custom on board ship to tell stories to pass the time. In short, mademoiselle, I have had experience. I know the world. Provide yourself with an entertainment. Make each passenger tell you his story. And if there is one who has not often cursed his life, who has not often said to himself that he was the most unfortunate of men, throw me headfirst into the sea. How Candide was obliged to separate from the fair Cunegonde and the old womandy. The fair Cunegonde, having heard the old woman's story, treated her with all the politeness due to a person of her rank and merit. She accepted the proposition and persuaded all the passengers, one after the other, to tell her their adventures. She and Candide admitted that the old woman was right. It was most unfortunate, said Candide, that the wise Pangloss was hanged contrary to custom at an auto-da-fe. He would have said admirable things about the physical and moral evils which cover the earth and the sea, and I should feel myself strong enough to urge a few objections with all due respect. While each of the passengers was telling his story, the ship proceeded on its way. They arrived at Buenos Aires. Cunegonde, Captain Candide, and the old woman went to call on the governor, Don Fernando de Barra y Figueroa y Mascarenes y Lampourdos y Sousa. This gentleman had the pride befitting a man who owned so many names. He talked to men with a most noble disdain, turning his nose up so far, raising his voice so pitilessly, assuming so imposing a tone, affecting so lofty a carriage, that all who addressed him were tempted to give him a thrashing. He had a furious passion for women. Cunegonde seemed to him the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. The first thing he did was to ask if she were the captain's wife. The air withheld, which he asked this question alarmed Candide. He did not dare say that she was his wife, because as a matter of fact she was rot. He dared not say she was his sister, because she was not that either. And though this official lie was formerly extremely fashionable among the ancients, and might be useful to the moderns, his soul was too pure to depart from truth. Mademoiselle Cunegonde, said he, is about to do me the honour of marrying me, and we beg your excellency to be present at the wedding. Don Fernando de Barra y Figueroa Mascarenes y Lampourdos y Sousa twisted his moustache, smiled bitterly, and ordered Captain Candide to go and inspect his company. Candide obeyed. The governor remained with Mademoiselle Cunegonde. He declared his passion, vowed that the next day he would marry her publicly, or otherwise, as it might please her charms. Cunegonde asked for a quarter of an hour to collect herself, to consult the old woman, and to make up her mind. The old woman said to Cunegonde, "You have 72 quarterings, and you haven't a shilling. It is in your power to be the wife of the greatest lord in South America, who has an exceedingly fine moustache. Is it for you to pride yourself on a rigid fidelity? You have been raped by Bulgarians. A Jew and an inquisitor have enjoyed your good graces. Misfortunes confer certain rights. If I were in your place, I confess I should not have the least scruple in marrying the governor and making Captain Candide's fortune." While the old woman was speaking with all that prudence which comes from age and experience, they saw a small ship come into the harbour. An alcaide and some alguazils were on board, and this is what had happened. The old woman had guessed correctly that it was a long-sleeved monk who stole Cunegonde's money and jewels at Badajoz, when she was flying in all haste with Candide. The monk tried to sell some of the gems to a jeweller. The merchant recognized them as the property of the Grand Inquisitor. Before the monk was hanged, he confessed that he had stolen them. He described the persons and the direction they were taking. The flight of Cunegonde and Candide was already known. They were followed to Cadiz. Without any waste of time, a vessel was sent in pursuit of them. The vessel was already in the harbour at Buenos Aires. The rumour spread that an alcaide was about to land, and that he was in pursuit of the murderers of his lordship, the Grand Inquisitor. The prudent old woman saw in a moment what was about to be done. "You cannot escape," she said to Cunegonde, "and you have nothing to fear. You did not kill his lordship. Moreover, the governor is in love with you and will not allow you to be maltreated. Stay here." She ran to Candide at once. "Fly," said she, "or in an hour's time you will be burned." There was not a moment to lose, but how could he leave Cunegonde, and where could he take refuge? By the beginning of chapter 26, where our second selection opens, Candide has lost both Cunegonde and his personal servant Cacambo, but gained Martin, his pessimistic friend. After his reunion with Cacambo and their extraordinary experience at the inn, he sets out for Constantinople and Cunegonde, while Voltaire begins to pull the threads of his narrative together. Both Dr. Pangloss and Cunegonde's brother turn up yet again, the doctor still refusing to budge from his philosophical position. The lovers' meeting in chapter 29 is handled with typical cynicism, while the last chapter reassesses the views on life we have heard. It ends with Candide's resigned but by no means hopeless conclusion. Sekic 6th. How Candide and Martin supped with 6 strangers and who they were. One evening, when Candide and Martin were going to sit down to table with the strangers who lodged in the same hotel, a man with a face the colour of soot came up to him from behind, and taking him by the arm, said, "Get ready to come with us and do not fail." He turned round and saw Cacambo. Only the sight of Cunegonde could have surprised and pleased him more. He was almost wild with joy. He embraced his dear friend. "Cunegonde is here, of course? Where is she? Take me to her. Let me die of joy with her." "Cunegonde is not here," said Cacambo. "She is in Constantinople." "Heavens, in Constantinople, but were she in China, I would fly to her. Let us start at once." "We will start after supper," replied Cacambo. "I cannot tell you any more. At 1 a.m. a slave, and my master is waiting for me. I must go and serve him at table. Do not say anything. Eat your supper, and be in readiness." Candide, torn between joy and grief, charmed to see his faithful agent again, amazed to see him a slave, filled with the idea of seeing his mistress again, with turmoil in his heart, agitation in his mind, sat down to table with Martin, who met every strange occurrence with the same calmness, and with 6 strangers who had come to spend the Carnival at Venice. Cacambo, who acted as butler to one of the strangers, bent down to his master's head towards the end of the meal and said, "Sire, your majesty can leave when you wish. The ship is ready." After saying this, Cacambo withdrew. The guests looked at each other with surprise without saying a word, when another servant came up to his master and said, "Sire, your majesty's post-chaise is at Padua, and the boat is ready." The master made a sign, and the servant departed. Once more all the guests looked at each other, and the general surprise doubled. A third servant went up to the third stranger and said, "Sire, believe me, your majesty cannot remain here any longer. One will prepare everything." And he immediately disappeared. Candide and Martin had no doubt that this was a carnival masquerade. A fourth servant said to the fourth master, "Your majesty can leave when you wish." And he went out like the others. The fifth servant spoke similarly to the fifth master, but the sixth servant spoke differently to the sixth stranger who was next to Candide, and said, "Faith, sire, they will not give your majesty any more credit, nor me either, and we may very likely be jailed tonight, both of us. I am going to look to my own affairs. Goodbye." When the servants had all gone, the 6 strangers, Candide and Martin, remained in profound silence. At last it was broken by Candide. "Gentlemen," said he, "this is a curious jest. How is it you are all kings? I confess that neither Martin nor I are kings." Cacambo's master then gravely spoke and said in Italian, "One am not jesting. My name is Achmet III. For several years I was sultan. I dethroned my brother. My nephew dethroned me. They cut off the heads of my viziers. I am ending my days in the old seraglio. My nephew, Sultan Mahmud, sometimes allows me to travel for my health, and I have come to spend the carnival at Venice." A young man who sat next to Achmet spoke after him and said, "My name is Ivan. I was emperor of all the Russias. I was dethroned in my cradle. My father and mother were imprisoned, and I was brought up in prison. I sometimes have permission to travel, accompanied by those who guard me, and I have come to spend the carnival at Venice." The third said, "I am Charles Edward, King of England. My father gave up his rights to the throne to me, and I fought a war to assert them. The hearts of 800 of my adherents were torn out and dashed in their faces. I have been in prison. One am going to Rome to visit the king, my father, who is dethroned like my grandfather and me, and I have come to spend the carnival at Venice." The fourth then spoke and said, "Tam, the king of Poland, the chance of war deprived me of my hereditary states. My father endured the same reverse of fortune. One am resigned to Providence, like the Sultan Achmet, the Emperor Ivan, and King Charles Edward, to whom God grant long life, and I have come to spend the carnival at Venice." The fifth said, "Also am the King of Poland. I have lost my kingdom twice, but Providence has given me another state, in which I have been able to do more good than all the kings of the Sarmatians together, have been ever able to do on the banks of the Vistula. I also am resigned to Providence, and I have come to spend the carnival at Venice." It was now for the sixth monarch to speak. "Gentlemen," said he, "T am not so eminent as you, but I have been a king like anyone else. I am Theodore. I was elected king of Corsica. I have been called your majesty, and now I am barely called sir. I have coined money and do not own a thing. I have had 2 secretaries of state, and now have scanavalet. I have occupied a throne, and for a long time lay ghost straw in a London prison. I am much afraid one shall be treated in the same way here, although I have come, like your majesties, to spend the carnival at Venice." The 5 other kings listened to this speech with a noble compassion. Each of them gave King Theodore 20 sequins to buy clothes and shirts. Candide presented him with a diamond worth 2,000 sequin. "Who is this man," said the 5 kings, "who is able to give 100 times as much as any of us, and who gives it?" As they were leaving the table, there came to the same hotel 4 Seren highnesses, who had also lost their states in the chance of war, and who had come to spend the rest of the carnival at Venice, but Candide did not even notice these newcomers. He could think of nothing but of going to Constantinople to find his dear Cunegonde. Thanks Luthenth Candide's voyage to Constantinople. The faithful Cacambo had already spoken to the Turkish captain who was to take Sultan Achmet back to Constantinople, and had obtained permission for Candide and Martin to come on board. They both entered this ship after having prostrated themselves before his miserable highness. On the way, Candide said to Martin, "So we have just supped with 6 dethroned kings, and among those 6 kings there was one to whom I gave charity. Perhaps there are many other princes still more unfortunate. Now, one have only lost 100 sheep, and one am hastening to Cunegonde's arms. My dear Martin, once more, Pangloss was right, all is well." "I hope so," said Martin. "But," said Candide, "this is a very singular experience we have just had at Venice. Nobody has ever seen or heard of 6 dethroned kings supping together in a tavern." "'Tis no more extraordinary," said Martin, "than most of the things which have happened to us. It is very common for kings to be dethroned, and as to the honour we have had of supping with them, 'tis a trifle not deserving our attention." Scarcely had Candide entered the ship when he threw his arms round the neck of the old valet of his friend Cacambo. "Well," said he, "what is Cunegonde doing? Is she still a marvel of beauty? Does she still love me? How is she? Of course you have bought her a palace in Constantinople?" "My dear master," replied Cacambo, "Cunegonde is washing dishes on the banks of Propontis for a prince who possesses very few dishes. She is a slave in the house of a former sovereign named Rogotskai, who receives in his refuge 3 crowns a day from the Grand Turk. But what is even sadder is that she has lost her beauty and has become horribly ugly." "Ah, beautiful or ugly," said Candide. "I am a man of honour, and my duty is to love her always. But how can she be reduced to so abject a condition with the 5 or 6 millions you carried off?" "Ah," said Cacambo, "did I not have to give 2 millions to Senor Don Fernando del Barra y Figueora y Mascarenes y Lampundos y Souza, governor of Buenos Aires, for permission to bring away Mademoiselle Cunegonde? And did not a pirate bravely strip us of all the rest? And did not this pirate take us to Cap Matapan, to Milo, to Nicaria, to Samos, to Petra, to the Dardanelles, to Marmora, to Scutari? Cunegonde and the old woman are servants to the prince I mentioned, and I am slave to the dethroned sultan." "What a chain of terrible calamities," said Candide. "But after all, I still have a few diamonds. I shall easily deliver Cunegonde. What a pity she has become so ugly." Then turning to Martin, he said, "Who do you think is the most to be pitied? The Sultan Achmet, the Emperor Ivan, King Charles Edward, or me?" "I do not know at all," said Martin. "I should have to be in your hearts to know." "Ah!" said Candide. "If Pangloss were here, he would know and would tell us." "I do not know," said Martin, "what scales your Pangloss would use to weigh the misfortunes of men and to estimate their sufferings. All I presume is that there are millions of men on the earth 100 times more to be pitied than King Charles Edward, the Emperor Ivan, and the Sultan Achmet." "That may very well be," said Candide. In a few days they reached the Black Sea Channel. Candide began by paying a high ransom for Cacambo, and without wasting time, he went on board a galley with his companions bound for the shores of Propontis, in order to find Cunegonde, however ugly she might be. Among the galley slaves were 2 convicts who rowed very badly, and from time to time the Levantine captain applied several strokes of a bull's pitzel to their naked shoulders. From a natural feeling of pity, Candide watched them more attentively than the other galley slaves and went up to them. Some features of their disfigured faces appeared to him to have some resemblance to Pangloss and the wretched Jesuit, the Baron, Mademoiselle Cunegonde's brother. This idea disturbed and saddened him. He looked at them still more carefully. "Truly," said he to Cacambo, "if I had not seen Dr. Pangloss hanged, and if I had not been so unfortunate as to kill the Baron, I should think they were rowing in this galley." At the words Baron and Pangloss, the 2 convicts gave a loud cry, stopped on their seats and dropped their oars. The Levantine captain ran up to them, and the lashes with the bull's pitzel were redoubled. "Stop, stop, sir," cried Candide. "I will give you as much money as you want." "What, is it Candide?" said one of the convicts. "What is it, Candide?" said the other. "Is it a dream?" said Candide. "Am I awake? Am I in this galley? Is that my lord the Baron whom I killed? Is that Dr. Pangloss whom I saw hanged?" It is, they replied. "What, is that the great philosopher?" said Martin. "Ah, sir," said Candide to the Levantine captain, "how much money do you want for my Lord Thunder-ten-Tronckh, one of the first barons of the empire, and for Dr. Pangloss, the most profound metaphysician of Germany?" "Dog of a Christian," replied the Levantine captain, "since these 2 dogs of Christian convicts are barons and metaphysicians, which no doubt is a high rank in their country, you shall pay me 50,000 sequins." "You shall have them, sir. Row back to Constantinople like lightning, and you shall be paid at once. But no, take me to Mademoiselle Cunegonde." The captain at Candide's first offer had already turned the bow towards the town, and rowed there more swiftly than a bird deaves the air. Candide embraced the Baron and Pangloss 100 times. "How was it I did not kill you, my dear Baron? And, my dear Pangloss, how do you happen to be alive after having been hanged? And why are you both in a Turkish galley?" "Is it really true that my dear sister is in this country?" said the Baron. "Yes," replied Cacambo. "So once more I see my dear Candide," cried Pangloss. Candide introduced Martin and Cacambo. They all embraced and all talked at the same time. The galley few. Already they were in the harbour. They sent for a loo, and Candide sold him for 50,000 sequins, a diamond worth 100,000, for which he swore by Abraham he could not give any more. The ransom of the Baron and Pangloss was immediately paid. Pangloss threw himself at the feet of his liberator and bathed them with tears. The other thanked him with a nod and promised to repay the money at the first opportunity. "But is it possible that my sister is in Turkey?" said he. "Nothing is so possible," replied Cacambo, "since she washes the dishes of a prince of Transylvania." They immediately sent for 2 Jews. Candide sold some more diamonds, and they all set out in another galley to rescue Cunegonde. Dick the Eighth, what happened to Candide, to Cunegonde, to Pangloss, to Martin, etc.? "Pardon once more," said Candide to the Baron. "Pardon me, Reverend Father, for having thrust my sword through your body." "Let us say no mummery about it," said the Baron. "I admit I was a little too sharp, but since you wish to know how it was you saw me in a galley, I must tell you that after my wound was healed by the brother apothecary of the college, I was attacked and carried off by a Spanish raiding party. I was imprisoned in Buenos Aires at the time when my sister had just left. I asked to return to the Vicar General in Rome. I was ordered to Constantinople to act as almoner to the ambassador of France. A week after I had taken up my office, I met towards evening a very handsome young page of the Sultan. It was very hot. The young man wished to bathe. I took the opportunity to bathe also. I did not know that it was a most serious crime for a Christian to be found naked with a young Mahometan. A Qadi sentenced me to 100 strokes on the soles of my feet and condemned me to the galley. I do not think a more horrible injustice has ever been committed. But I should very much like to know why my sister is in the kitchen of a Transylvanian sovereign living in exile among the Turks." "But, my dear Pangloss," said Candide, "how does it happen that I see you once more?" "It is true," said Pangloss, "that you saw me hanged, and in the natural course of events I should have been burned. But you remember, it poured with rain when they were going to roast me, The storm was so violent that they despaired of lighting the fire. I was hanged because they could do nothing better. A surgeon brought my body, carried me home, and dissected me. He first made a crucial incision in me from the navel to the collarbone. Nobody could have been worse hanged than I was. The executioner of the Holy Inquisition, who was a subdeacon, was marvellously skillful in burning people, but he was not used to hanging them. The rope was wet and did not slide easily, and it was knotted. In short, I still breathed. The crucial incision caused me to utter so loud a scream that the surgeon fell over backwards and, thinking he was dissecting the devil, fled away in terror and fell down the staircase in his flight. His wife ran in from another room at the noise. She saw me stretched out on the table with my crucial incision. She was still more frightened than her husband, fled and fell on top of him. When they had recovered a little, I heard the surgeon's wife say to the surgeon, "My dear, what were you thinking of to dissect a heretic? Don't you know the devil always possesses them? I will go and get a priest at once to exorcise him." At this I shuddered and collected the little strength I had left to shout, "Have pity on me." At last the Portuguese barber grew bolder. He sewed up my skin. His wife even took care of me, and at the end of a fortnight I was able to walk again. The barber found me a situation and made me lackey to a knight of Malta who was going to Venice. But as my master had no money to pay me wages, I entered the service of a Venetian merchant and followed him to Constantinople. One day I took it into my head to enter a mosque. There was nobody there except an old imam and a very pretty young devotee who was reciting her prayers. Her breasts were entirely uncovered. Between them she wore a bunch of tulips, roses, anemones, ranunculus, hyacinths, and auriculas. She dropped her bunch of flowers. I picked it up and returned it to her with a most respectful alacrity. I was so long putting them back that the imam grew angry and, seeing I was a Christian, called for help. I was taken to the Candide, who sentenced me to receive 100 strokes on the soles of my feet and sent me to the galleys. I was chained on the same seat and in the same galley as my lord the Baron. In this galley there were 4 young men from Marseille, 5 Neapolitan priests, and 2 monks from Corfu, who assured us that similar accidents occurred every day. His lordship the Baron claimed that he had suffered a greater injustice than I, and I claimed that it was much more permissible to replace a bunch of flowers between a woman's breasts than to be naked with one of the Sultan's pages. We argued continually, and every day received 20 strokes of the bull's pitzel when the chain of events of this universe led you to our galley, and you ransomed us. "Well, my dear Pangloss," said Candide, "when you were hanged, dissected, stunned with blows, and made to row in the galleys, did you always think that everything was for the best in this world?" "I am still of my first opinion," replied Pangloss, "for after all I am a philosopher, and it would be unbecoming for me to recant, since Leibniz could not be in the wrong, and pre-established harmony is the finest thing imaginable, like the plenum and subtle matter. My ninth, how Candide found Cunegonde and the old woman. While Candide, the Baron, Pangloss, Martin, and Cacambo were relating their adventures, reasoning upon contingent or non-contingent events of the universe, arguing about effects and causes, moral and physical evil, free will and necessity, and the consolations to be found in the Turkish galleys, they came to the house of the Transylvanian prince on the shores of Propontis. The first objects which met their sight were Cunegonde and the old woman hanging out towels to dry on the line. At this sight the Baron grew pale. Candide, that tender lover, seeing his fair Cunegonde sunburned, blear-eyed, flat-breasted, with wrinkles round her eyes and red, chapped arms, recoiled 3 paces in horror, and then advanced from mere politeness. She embraced Candide and her brother. They embraced the old woman. Candide bought them both. In the neighbourhood was a little farm. The old woman suggested that Candide should buy it until some better fate befell the group. Cunegonde did not know that she had become ugly, for nobody had told her so. She reminded Candide of his promises in so peremptory a tone that the good Candide dared not refuse her. He therefore informed the Baron that he was about to marry his sister. "Never," said the Baron, "will I endure such baseness on her part and such insolence on yours. Nobody shall ever reproach me with this infamy. My sister's children could never enter the noble assemblies of Germany. No, my sister shall never marry anyone but a baron of the empire." Cunegonde threw herself at his feet and bathed him in tears, but he was inflexible. "Madman," said Candide, "why qued you from the galleys? One paid your ransom, and she was washing dishes here. She is ugly. I am so kind. Make her my wife, and you pretend to oppose me. I show you again if I listen to my anger." "You may kill me," said the baron, "but you shall never marry my sister while one are alive." At the bottom of his heart, Candide had not the least wish to marry Cunegonde, but the baron's extreme impertinence mined him to complete the marriage, and Cunegonde urged so warmly that he could not retract. He consulted Pangloss Martin and the faithful Cacambo. Pangloss wrote an excellent memorandum by which he proved that the baron had no rights over his sister, and that by all the laws of the empire she could make a left-handed marriage with Candide. Martin advised that the baron should be thrown into the sea. Cacambo decided that he should be returned to the Levantine captain and sent back to the galleys, after which he could be returned by the first ship to the vicar-general at Rome. This was thought to be very good advice. The old woman approved it. They said nothing to the Sister. The plan was carried out with the aid of a little money, and they had the pleasure of duping a Jesuit and punishing the pride of a German baron. It would be natural to suppose that when, after so many disasters, Candide was married to his mistress, and living with philosopher Pangloss, the philosopher Martin, the prudent Cambo, and the old woman, having brought back so many Admons from the country of the ancient Incas, he would lead most pleasant life imaginable. But he was so cheated by you Jews that he had nothing left but his little farm. His wife, growing uglier every day, became shrewish and unendurable. The old woman was ailing and even more bad-tempered than Cunegonde. Cacambo, who worked in the garden and then went to Constantinople to sell vegetables, was overworked and cursed his fate. Pangloss was in despair because he did not shine in some German university. As for Martin, he was firmly convinced that people are equally uncomfortable everywhere. He accepted things patiently. Candide, Martin, and Pangloss sometimes argued about metaphysics and morals. From the windows of the farm, they often watched the ships going by, filled with effendis, pashas, and cadis, who were being exiled to Lemnos, to Mytilene, and Erzurum. They saw other cadis, other pashas, and other effendis coming back to take the place of the exiles and to be exiled in their turn. They saw the neatly impaled heads which were taken to the Sublime Porte. These sights redoubled their discussions, and when they were not arguing, the boredom was so excessive that one day the old woman dared to say to them, "I should like to know which is worse, to be raped 100 times by Negro pirates, to have a buttock cut off, to run the gauntlet among the Bulgarians, to be whipped and flogged in an hour." "'Tis a great question," said Knox. These remarks led to new reflections, and Martin, especially, concluded that man was born to live in the convulsions of distress or in the lethargy of boredom. Candide did not agree, but asserted nothing. Pangloss confessed that he had always suffered horribly, but having once maintained that everything was for the best, he had continued to maintain it without believing it. One thing confirmed Martin in his detestable principles, made Candide hesitate more than ever, and embarrassed Pangloss. And it was this. One day there came to their farm Paquette and Friar Giroflée, who were in the most extreme misery. They had soon wasted their 3,000 piastres, had left each other, made up, quarrelled again, been put in prison, escaped, and finally Friar Giroflée had turned Turk. Paquette continued her occupation everywhere, and now earned nothing by it. "I foresaw," said Martin to Candide, "that your gifts would soon be wasted and would only make them the more miserable. You and Cacambo were once bloated with millions of piastres, and you are no happier than Friar Giroflée and Paquette." "Ah! Ha!" said Pangloss to Paquette, "so heaven brings you back to us, my dear child. Do you know that you cost me the end of my nose, an eye, and an ear? What a plight you are in! Ah, what a world this is!" This new occurrence caused them to philosophize more than ever. In the neighbourhood there lived a very famous dervish, who was supposed to be the best philosopher in Turkey. They went to consult him. Pangloss was the spokesman and said, "Master, we have come to beg you to tell us why so strange an animal as man was ever created." "What has it to do with you?" said the dervish. "Is it your business?" "But, Reverend Father," said Candide, "there is a horrible amount of evil in the world." "What does it matter," said the dervish, "whether there is evil or good? When His Highness sends a ship to Egypt, does he worry about the comfort or discomfort of the rats in the ship?" "Then what should we do?" said Pangloss. "Hold your tongue," said the dervish. "I flattered myself," said Pangloss, "that I should discuss with you effects and causes, this best of all possible worlds, the origin of evil, the nature of the soul, and pre-established harmony." At these words, the dervish slammed the door in their faces. During this conversation, the news went round that at Constantinople, 2 viziers and the mufti had been strangled and several of their friends impaled. This catastrophe made a prodigious noise everywhere for several hours. As Pangloss, Candide, and Martin were returning to their little farm, they came upon an old man who was taking the air under a bower of orange trees at his door. Pangloss, who was as curious as he was argumentative, asked him what was the name of the mufti who had just been strangled. "I do not know," replied the old man. "I have never known the name of any mufti or of any vizier. I am entirely ignorant of the occurrence you mention. I presume that, in general, those who meddle with public affairs sometimes perish miserably, and that they deserve it. But I never inquire what is going on in Constantinople. I content myself with sending there for sale the produce of the garden I cultivate." Having spoken thus, he took the strangers into his house. His 2 daughters and his 2 sons presented them with several kinds of sherbet which they made themselves, Caimac flavoured with candied citron peel, oranges, lemons, limes, pineapples, dates, pistachios, and mocha coffee, which had not been mixed with the bad coffee of Batavia and the Isles. After which this good Mussulman's 2 daughters perfumed the beards of Candide, Pangloss, and Martin. "You must have a vast and magnificent estate," said Candide to the Turk. "Have only 20 acres," replied the Turk. "I cultivate them with my children, and work keeps at bay 3 great evils, boredom, vice, and need." As Candide returned to his farm, he reflected deeply on the Turk's remarks. He said to Pangloss and Martin, "That good old man seems to me to have chosen an existence preferable by far to that of the 6 kings with whom we had the honour to sup." "Exalted rank," said Pangloss, "is very dangerous according to the testimony of all philosophers, for Eglon, king of the Moabites, was murdered by Ehud. Absalom was hanged by the hair and pierced by 3 darts. King Nadab, son of Jeroboam, was killed by Baasha. King Elah by Zimri. Ahaziah by Jehu. Athaliah by Jehoiada. The kings Jehoiakim, Jeconiah, and Zedekiah were made slaves. You know in what manner died Croesus, Astyages, Darius, Denis of Syracuse, Pyrrhus, Perseus, Hannibal, Jugurtha, Ariovistus, Caesar, Pompey, Nero, Otho, Vitellius, Domitian, Richard II of England, Edward II, Henry VI, Richard III, Mary Stuart, Charles I, the 3 Henrys of France, the Emperor Henry IV. You know." "I also know," said Candide, "that we should cultivate our garden." "You are right," said Pangloss, "for when man was placed in the Garden of Eden, he was placed there ut operatorum, to dress it and to keep it, which proves that man was not born for idleness." "Let us work without theorizing," said Martin. "'Tis the only way to make life endurable." The whole small fraternity entered into this praiseworthy plan, and each started to make use of his talents. The little farm yielded well. Cunegonde was indeed very ugly, but she became an excellent pastry cook, paquette embroidered. The old woman took care of the linen. Even Friar Giroflée performed some service. He was a very good carpenter, and even became a man of honour. And Pangloss sometimes said to Candide, "All events are linked up in this best of all possible worlds. For, if you had not been expelled from the noble castle, by hard kicks in your backside for love of Mademoiselle Cunegonde, if you had not been clapped into the Inquisition, if you had not wandered about America on foot, if you had not stuck your sword in the Baron, if you had not lost all your sheep from the land of El Dorado, you would not be eating candied citrons and pistachios here." "That's well said," replied Candide, "but we must cultivate our garden."